So Chief Darrell, Waldron's going to say a few words before we close our program. Thank you.
Somebody dropped a feather, small feather out there, if you're missing one. It was given to me, so. Anyway, I'm Darrell Waldron. I carry a couple of hats. I'm a chief of the Seekonk Wampanoag tribe, which is right now struggling in this state for recognition. I'm also the executive director of the Rhode Island Indian Council. So these events for me are a little bit different because I've been cleaning up the mess left behind after the wars and dealing with the historical trauma of most of the Indians across the country. So sometimes instead of just talking at you, and I got 41 years of experience, I've probably been to most of the reservations. I've seen some absolutely horrific things that the United States, America, doesn't really know about on some of these 11 million acre reservations with absolutely no services. So, you know, I can answer some questions if you have some questions about it, and I can talk a little bit about what's going on a national level, which I think is important. So if you guys want to ask some questions about Indian country and kind of what's happening on a national level? No? All right, so let's talk about, which is a really big product right now on the Hill, is boarding schools, right? Boarding schools are very important. I was up on the Hill, and by the way, it was all women on the Hill fighting for that. There was no men there. And a lot of them were elders who actually grew up in the boarding schools. It's kind of a misconception in America about boarding schools and where they came from. A lot of people kind of think boarding schools was a good way to Christianize and kind of kill the savage, I guess, and save the person and all that. That's not really what happened. They actually killed their parents on the wars and the prairies and attacks. And at the end of the battle with the soldiers went into the villages, they found children. A bunch of children, right? Thousands of children. And the military didn't really know what to do with them, right? They were soldiers. So whatever they did to them, which was probably not very nice, they then marched them into the nearest town and found probably some church groups or some good immigrants that were kind of new to the country, and they started creating the boarding schools. And the boarding schools went into the late 60s, and some of them were converted into schools on reservations. But we're dealing with that population, the grandchildren of those folks, and in some cases, children of those folks. And these ladies that were on the Hill were residents there and told some pretty nasty stories. I got to give Biden credit for allowing it, and I think the legislation is going to continue to move forward. Rhode Island had them. The place where Rhode Island College is built was a massive boarding school with a lot of Indian kids in it. And their identities stolen. One of the most impacting things that was in that hearing was the graves. So I don't know if you've been to the Washington D.C., the big huge cemetery there, all the soldiers are buried in the White Crosses. They had photographs of unmarked Indian graves of Indian children. They were white stones with a little round face on it. And it said on them, "The Unknown." And it was massive. 5,000, 3,000, the pictures are absolutely incredible. And the unknown Indian kids. Right? And that's not that long ago, the turning of the 19th century, from 1890s forward. And so, that's like massive historical trauma, right? And, we're dealing with that, and the body keeps that stuff. So I'm part of the team that's with about 200 urban Indian centers across the country that work attacking the opportunities and the laws that the country put together for tribes. The indigenous are very much a different thing from tribal governments. Tribes are political entities, they are governments, they have federal laws, that back up them. They have state laws that back up them. And they're serious laws. They are enforceable, very much enforceable. A lot of folks don't know about those laws. The laws do change a little bit, going back and forth. So we kind of deal with that at the Rhode Island Indian Council. We're 7 states wide, and we work across the country. We have counterparts in California, and we have these very large gatherings where we work to improve quality of Indian people. We have NCAI, we're just having a big meeting in February up in Connecticut, where they'll be introducing all their bills on behalf of Indian people. So we need to be a little careful with the headings of who we are, because we are not really indigenous people. We are tribal governments. Before, we were called Indians, we were Poconokeets, we were Cherokees, we were Choctaws, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll share that with you, and I was on a call this week with the Indian Health Services, which is growing in massive size, for off-reservation Indians. State and federally recognized, we spend about $6 million in New York. And we're advocating, right? And indigenous came up, and services came up, and how do we deal with those services? So I'm assuming there'll be a definition at some point that separates those indigenous movements, which are wonderful, and it's support, and it's other Native people that are joining us and all of that, but we do need to be a little careful with our laws, because they can begin to diminish. So that's a concern. I can share another story, not as pleasant as your story, but it's a true story. So, Oklahoma, how many people have been to Oklahoma? Anybody in the room? Right. So you know, you land in Dallas, you drive out to Indian country, drive for 2 hours or so, you come onto these flags that say, "Welcome to the Indian Nations," right? And there's like 100 of these beautiful flags that hang. And that is a massive reservation. It takes you 2 hours to drive across it at 50 miles an hour, right? Wow. And all the tribes that are there. The first time I went was in the mid-'80s, and everybody was there. There were Seminoles there, and then you could identify the Seminoles through the colors in their clothing, and it's kind of like a homecoming. And those Indians that went to Oklahoma, a lot of them on that Trail of Tears, the original Trail of Tears, could read and write. Okay, they were partially educated, and they wrote memoirs. Right? And there was a little girl there who was now near 90s, who was a daughter who had the memoirs of her mom, who was on the Trail of Tears. And it was, I don't know, 500 or 600 Native people in the session. And she began to tell a story about the name of the Trail of Tears. And so, Indian culture is different wherever you go. We have, which was eloquently told today with some great history. But when you go places, their beliefs are obviously different. So we're sitting there listening, and she started, telling the story of what was this woman that was very young on the trail. And she talked about these pieces of black onyx, what they called Indian tears. And so I have a ring with one of them in it, which is this shiny piece of black onyx, and it's mounted on eagle wings. And I thought it was a nice piece of art. I got it in Oklahoma, and then I asked the meaning of it. And in it was the tears that fell on the ground during the Trail of Tears, and they turned into black stones. Amorite, onyx, and there's another one that's a kind of a translucent black. And I always enjoyed wearing it. It was a reminder of the work that needed to be continued. So when she started to tell the story, and it's not very long, she said the term Trail of Tears came because the wagon masters. Now, wagon master on the Red River, John Wayne movies, was a strong personality guy that was determined to, get the job done and get the pilgrims across the wherever. The real term master is exactly what it means, master, and they were not very nice. They were like prison guards, you know, on this thing. And every morning what they would do is would round up all the sick babies that was on the Trail of Tears, and they would kill them. They would smash their skulls, and they would kill these sick children. And then, of course, all these people would cry, stand and cry, especially the females, right? Stand and cry. And that's where the Trail of Tears got its name. And the Apache Tears, Lakota Tears, Seminole, whatever you want, Indian Tears created these rings. And people got them on. So not all the history with Native people is nice like you heard tonight. I have a hard time, my heart's gotten hardened over the 40 years of serving people that are sick. Those reservations are not very nice. I don't often sleep on them. I usually stay in town. Recognition is a powerful tool. It enforces the law. It gives you status to correct, hopefully, those things and to provide a life for your children. So it's more about the young. These are my relatives here on my mom's side. My father's side is Narragansett. I'm more of an intertribal Indian guy. I have some of my favorite tribes that I hung out with, but there's also some scary things with some of those places. The Seekonk Wampanoag tribe are part of my mom's family. Started back in 1996. It was the Pokanoket, which, by the way, is the most written about tribal nation in this part of the country. I read the act, part of the act, for recognition. There was a contiguous piece in it missing, but there's just so much history on that. And they were never called Wampanoags, but that all came later. But there was something that happened, and the family split, and the folks that lived in the Seekonk area that were descendants of Anawan, except my mom said it was in her backyard. It was from there. It was 92 now. And it was pretty sharp of mind on certain days with history. She was one of the founders of the organization that I work at. And, I think that is a very worthy event to go after, get your recognition, and get the laws behind it, and get the repatriation dollars and the things that you need to study your culture. There are so many, and I mean so many different Indian cultures out there that they all need to be put forward with those that want to put them forward, right? But anyway, in '96, they officially got acknowledged on the state of Massachusetts. And then we're working, and acknowledged is not really recognized as much as the word recognized, but they're there. We're putting the bill forward for a second time in January, and it looks pretty good right now. I've had conversations with the governor, Speaker of the House, and we've corrected some of the negativity that came about. Some of the history you told, Chief, would be welcome in those testimonies. And so I'm just trying to clean it up. I'll get together with you.
You talk about the Trail of Tears, and they set out around 500 times, just killed them because they were Indian, women and children. Before there was a Western frontier, there was
500 years they were here.
The history of this country started right here in New England. That's why they call it New England.
So
Across the pond. It started here, and if it weren't for the Pokanoket tribe and the Rappahannock tribe, it may not be in the United States of America. Because those are the two tribes that were the first two colonies were established. One in Jamestown, Rappahannock, and one here at Plymouth Plantation. 54 years apiece, because the Massasoit had his relatives signed that treaty. They're the ones who signed that treaty. All of those people who signed that treaty were his relatives.
I don't doubt. I mean,
I'll tell you who they are. I got them right here. I researched
it with you.
That's why they kept the case. The 9 signatures, yeah.
So next April 30th, 700 tribes are coming here. So we're doing a big, massive conference in Connecticut at Foxwoods. It's gonna go on for about 5 days. It is primarily around the services that tribes are allotted to, and what's going on a national level. There may be more than 700, we're planning for 700. Every single tribe will be there, hopefully, that's part of that program. And there'll probably be about 50 different Alaskan groups will be there, and it's gonna be discussed at NCAI and what's going on in Indian country. Yep. Yes, well, it's all the topics. It's, you know, they break up into about 100 workshops. So as we develop it, and I'm chairing it, so we're the host, so we're kind of putting it together, but we'll get with everybody. But the main point I wanna put here is that although there's beautiful things about who we are, and there's beautiful culture here, and we like to share that in the socialism, my heart isn't there, you know? I don't know when 3,000 miles from coast to coast was not enough for these Europeans. I just don't get it, and the terminology around treaties and all that was just BS. You know, they just murdered people, right? And so the ones who survived took the knee, and was able to survive so that we could be here, right? So, you know, and you work that long in Indian country, you start to really learn a lot about what's happened recently, not so much what's happened in the past. So I want to share a little bit of that with you, and I'll leave you with a saying that I learned, and I think I forget who said it. I have several old quotes in my phone from tribes prior to the Europeans that talked about them coming. And it's interesting how accurate they were in those prophecies. And so every now and then I just scroll through them. But anyway, one of the sayings goes that, you know, the entire world out here, the life, the nature, the world, the mother, you know, the 5 directions, the 4 we go to, and then the earth, is but a giant spider web. Right? It's a giant web, giant spider web. And us humans are not the origins of that web, but we are simply a strand in it. And I think that speaks to some of the problems that are happening today. I am seeing so many non-native groups taking native rights, and the definition's becoming more of an issue. $390 million went out to non-Indian groups out for service. So, support the movement. I think we all need to learn a little bit more about what's happening. NCAI tends to fight for us. And also the last thing I want to leave is the Micmac tribes out of Boston in 1975 worked with an Narragansett and a Rappahannock and created the FRAP office, Federal Acknowledgement Office. The Micmac woman was Joanne Dunn. I remember a very smart woman, one of the first PhDs out of Harvard. Worked with an attorney, and a guy named Gary Parker, and William Wilcox, that started the whole movement. Prior to that, there was really no recognition status outside of treaties. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hope it wasn't too sad.